Welcome to the Table Podcast. You are getting ready to hear a message by Pastor Ricc Conner called Blindsided from our series called Collide. We hope what you are about to hear will bring meaning and purpose to your life. If you have any questions or if this message touches you in any way, we would love to hear about it. You can find us at www.thetableonline.com.
And so we're in week 2 of a really quick series called Collide. And so 3 weeks, and we're in week 2 of it. And last week, if you weren't here, we discovered that a collision can be a good thing. Remember we talked about how oftentimes when we hear the word collision, we think of negative things or bad things. Every time I hear the word, right now my mind's going right back to that car wreck in college. But collision can also be a good thing, and it can promote change in our lives. And we called it the principle of collision, which is right up on the screen. The principle of collision is when two things collide, at least one of those objects is not going to remain the same. That when you have a collision, something changes. And last week we looked at a woman that had been bleeding for 12 years, and she had a collision with Jesus, and her life was forever changed. Immediately, like in an instant, as soon as she touched the hem of Jesus' robe, her life was completely changed forever. The bleeding stopped, it went away, and she changed her life, her course in life completely changed. And this week, I wanted to begin by telling you a story, and I've told some of you this story before, but it's about a boy named Eric. Eric was a 14-year-old kid in one of my youth groups a long, long time ago. I was in my 20s, and Eric was about 14. Eric had already been arrested numerous times. He had some sticky fingers, and he also had some habits with narcotics. And so Eric had struggled, and he was only 14 years old. And I remember that we convinced Eric to go on a beach retreat with us. And in that time in my youth group, every summer we did a thing called Youth Week. And we spent like Monday doing some kind of service. Sunday we did like Youth Sunday. Then Monday we did a service project. Tuesday we went to a theme park. Wednesday we did something else. And then Thursday, Friday, and Saturday we always went to Jekyll Island, Georgia. And we hung out there and we had a retreat. And I always had a guy named Dave Burke come and be the camp pastor, and he was just an amazing guy, loved Jesus, and he had a way of connecting with kids. And so Dave would come and meet us in Jekyll Island, Georgia. We'd do this retreat, and we convinced Eric to go on this trip. And Eric probably went kicking and screaming. If he did, he didn't tell me, but he had kind of one of those fringe kids that kind of came to church every once in a while. But we convinced him to go. He got on the bus. He went, and it was at the Days Inn in Jekyll Island, Georgia. I'll never forget it. There's this nasty room. I mean, it wasn't the cleanest hotel. It wasn't the nicest hotel. And we had like this meeting room, and the carpet was probably like 30 years old, never been cleaned. But we met in there, and we crammed a ton of kids in this room, and we all sat on the floor, and Dave would always bring the message, and it was always powerful. And I remember Dave would always, like the first night, he would always share the gospel. And he would always call kids to a commitment. He would always invite kids to give their lives to Christ. And it happened, just like it had always happened. It happened that night. He gave the call, and as soon as he gave the call, Eric bolted out the back door of the room. And so I knew that Eric had some problems, like I shared, and so I wasn't going to let Eric go off. And so I went after him, and he disappeared fast. I mean, he was quick on his feet, and I had to go find him. And then finally I went into the men's bathroom, and I find Eric, and he's sitting, no lie, he's under the countertop in the corner, huddled, and he's sobbing. This 14-year-old tough kid that had a rough life is stashed himself under the counter, and he is just crying. And I curled up with him, and I said, Eric, what is wrong? What's going on? And he looked at me, and with all sincerity and with all honesty, Eric looked at me and he said, Rick, he goes, I don't think that God could ever really love me because of what I have done. Now, Eric didn't know that I knew his past. His mom had kind of given me the heads up, and Eric wasn't aware of that. And he's like, you just don't know what I've done. And there's no way that God that man was talking about could ever love me. And I think, you know what? Me and you, we're a lot like Eric at different times in our lives. You see, we get blindsided by our past. And sometimes all it takes is a trigger, just a little trigger. Maybe it's, and those feelings just kind of well up. Maybe it's a song, or maybe it's a movie, or maybe it's a scent, or maybe it's a sight, or maybe it's a person, or maybe it's a name. But it just takes a little trigger, and then all that stuff from the past just kind of comes back. You can remember one time I was at of all places, a youth worker convention. It was my first youth worker convention. It was my first 2 months in youth ministry. So I was like, Chris, I know how you feel. I was there, and I went to a youth workers convention because that's where my pastor, he said, you just got to go to a youth workers convention. You got to figure it out. Okay. And so I went with his daughter, and when I was there, she goes, we met some of her friends. She goes, hey, Rick, I want to introduce you to Jennifer Stiles. And me and Jennifer, we knew each other because we had a past. And I remember immediately, as soon as I saw her and she saw me, because we didn't part ways on good terms, all of those emotions and all of those feelings and all of that stuff just came flooding back. And you could see that the same thing was happening in her world too. And at the end of the week, she goes, Rick, I just got to tell you something. I'm so sorry for being such a jerk to you. So I was the good guy in this story. I just want you to know that. Now, I haven't always been the good guy, but in this story, I was the good guy. And so it doesn't take much to trigger anything. And just like Eric, we struggle with our past, with things that maybe we're ashamed of. And not only do we struggle with shame, but I think we also struggle with giving up that stuff that causes shame. That we don't often want to just give it away to God. We don't think that maybe God can handle our past, or maybe we hold on to it and we struggle with the shame and we struggle with giving it up. And that's exactly what was going on in Eric's world as he was huddled under that sink in the men's bathroom in Jekyll Island, Georgia at the Days Inn. He was struggling with his shame. And then he had a collision with God. And it rocked his world. It completely rocked his world. You see, normally when that shame and that pain would come up, you know what Eric would do? He would just ignore it. He would just say, oh, it'll go away. Or maybe he would give in to the temptations that he was facing to dumb down the pain that he was feeling. He said, well, I'll just go and I'll steal some more, or I'll go and I'll do some more drugs, and that'll numb the pain. So he'd either ignore it or he would give in to it. But this time it was different. And just like Eric, I think you and I think we struggle also with our past and maybe with the pain. And maybe like Eric, sometimes we just ignore it, and maybe we either sweep it under the rug or shove it in the closet and shut the door and forget about it and ignore it. But if pain isn't enough, then we have this whole thing called pride. And pride really gets in the way because we keep our pain a secret because we don't want anyone else to know. And we're like, well, I couldn't share my struggles because I wouldn't want anyone to know what's going on, and we hide it. And then that just makes the pain even worse. And you know, you've got something that going on that's really private in your life, and oftentimes, here's what I think I'm the only one that's going through that. I don't know about you if you've ever felt that way, but you're like, oh, no one has ever struggled with it like I've struggled with it. And we like kind of take ownership of that and say, this is my thing, and nobody else would ever understand. And we're just too ashamed to ask for help. You see, Eric, he was struggling with some real issues in his life, stuff that he didn't think anyone else would understand. I mean, he looked right at me, square in the face, tears running down his eyes, and say, Rick, you'll never understand what I've gone through. I'm like, but Eric, you don't know that. And guess what? Everyone, and that means every parent, every child, every pastor, every teacher, every left-handed mechanic struggles with something. We all struggle with the past. We struggle with sin. We struggle with pride. There's things in our closets that we struggle with. And tonight, I just want us to take a look at another collision with Jesus that has an amazing before and an even more amazing after picture. And a picture that I saw in the life of Eric of this before, and I knew Eric before, and then I knew Eric after. And it's the story that you may be familiar with. It's a story of a demon-possessed man that meets Jesus. And after he meets Jesus, his life is forever changed. So if you have your Bibles, I want to encourage you to open up with me to Mark. And we're going to read chapter 5, and we're going to read the first 20 verses together. Mark chapter 5, Matthew, Mark. And Mark says this. He says, they, being Jesus and the disciples, came to the other side of the sea to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and he fell down at his feet. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding here on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country. And people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might go with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. Wow, what a before and after picture. We got the psycho guy, and he's living in the cemetery. He's so strong that chains can't even keep him down. He's cutting himself, and some of you may think cutting is a new thing. It's been going on for a long time. And what does this demon-possessed guy do? He runs to Jesus. Jesus doesn't even get 1 foot out of the boat, and demon-possessed guy is standing right there, ready to talk to Jesus. Now, I think this guy, not the demon guy, but the guy, I think that he knew, just like the woman last week knew, he knew that if he could just have a collision with Jesus, that he could get rid of the demon, that life would be different. Then the story gets crazy. The demon wants nothing to do with Jesus. He's afraid of Jesus, begs him to send him into the pigs. When pigs fly, there's where it came from. Deviled ham, I don't think that's where that came from. But can you imagine? I mean, just for a minute, can you imagine? You're sitting there, you're a herdsman, you're doing your thing, you're making sure the pigs are all there, counting them 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30, making sure you got them all, and all of a sudden, all 2,000 pigs take off and jump off the cliff into the lake and drown? I mean, can you think about that for a minute? What would you do? How are you going to explain that to the owners? What are you going to say? Well, they just all took off and jumped. I mean, it was a crazy scene that was going on there. It's like something that you would see on YouTube or Periscope or whatever, Snapchat. It's one of those weird things. It would have gone viral. I mean, if the video was there, it would have gone viral. And we see the guys, they're watching over the pigs, the herdsmen, they get freaked out, and what do? They run to tell the rest of the town. There's a crazy man, his name is Jesus, and he's doing weird things in the cemetery. Now, I'm sure that some of you might be like, yeah, demon possession, I don't know about that whole thing. I mean, I know what you're thinking. That stuff only happens in the movies like Exorcist or Chucky or Jason or whatever. But I think that no, the Bible tells us that there is spiritual battles going on that we can't see. And while you may not be possessed with an evil spirit, I guarantee that there's something that's possessing your life. That there's something that is keeping you from having a personal, intimate relationship with Jesus. I know in my life that there are times in my life where I'm like, whoa, I got to take a step back because I'm allowing other stuff to creep in on my relationship with Jesus. And I recognize, you know what? I'm not so close to God right now. And there's a reason why I'm not so close to God right now. God didn't move. He hasn't gone anywhere. He doesn't go anywhere. He's right there. So that means that I've moved or I've put stuff in between. And so I think all of us have that. I know I'm not the only one in this room that has that issue. And here we see that maybe there's something that's keeping us chained to a life of sin or something that might be keeping us from the abundant life. And here's what I know in my life. I know that the only thing that will radically change my life is that will have a before and after picture that will rock my socks off is a collision with Jesus. That there are times in my life where I have had to put myself in a place where I will have a collision with Jesus. That I've had to open up my heart, that I've had to lay down my junk, where I've had to say, you know what? It's either God or it's this. It's either God or it's a car. It's either God or it's this other relationship that's not healthy. It's either God or. And I've had to have a collision with God. So demon-possessed weirdo guy that was in the graveyard cutting had a collision with Jesus. And it was transformed. And what does verse 20 say? It says that he began to tell everyone about the great things that God had done for him. Let me ask you, church, when's the last time that you told somebody the great things that God is doing in your life? Are we sharing that? Are we telling people that we rub shoulders with? Are we purposely putting ourselves in a collision with people and saying, hey, I don't know where you stand. I don't know if you believe or not, but let me tell you what God's doing in my life now. Today, not 20 years ago when I gave my life to Christ, but today, May 2016, this is what God's doing in my life now. How do we do that? Are we sharing what's going on in our lives? Today, I want to leave you with a few things. I like practical stuff. I like to leave with some things that I can do or things I can take with me. And so tonight I want to leave you with 4 things to think about. And so maybe during the week, as you write them down on your little note page there, and you flip it over and talk about the reflections and you're reflecting on tonight's message, maybe you sit in front of a mirror and maybe you just have a quiet moment. And as you're sitting in front of that mirror, you say, you know what do I need to deal with in my life today so that I can have a closer walk with Jesus tomorrow? What is it that I need to do today? What's the conversation that me and God need to have now so that I can have a closer walk with him tomorrow? And I encourage you, I beg you, just take some time this week. Get in front of a mirror. Ask yourself the question, is there anything that is keeping me from having a closer walk with Jesus today? Just ask yourself the question. But here's some things to think about. Number one is this: embrace your demons. For whatever reason, we think we have to be like Eric and hide our demons. I do it, you do it. We like to wear masks. People ask, how are you doing? I'm doing good. And you just had the worst day ever, but I'm doing good. And we need to embrace our demons. And here's a reality check. I'm learning this. I still haven't learned it all, but I'm learning that you can't hide from God, and you can't hide your junk from God. And so we need to embrace our demons. You can fool your friends, you can fool your pastors, you can maybe even fool your family. It's taken me a while to learn this, but you can't fool God. And just own up. Own up to your struggles. Be honest. Be real with Jesus. Say, Jesus, this is what I'm struggling with. Say, God, I'm struggling with this. I'm hurting so bad because of this. And nothing that you tell God will surprise him. Nothing that you ever say to God, he'll be like, oh my gosh, I never saw that one coming. God's not going to say that. He may say, been there, done that, but he'll never say, wow, I really never saw that. So whatever we say to him will never surprise him, because God knows us. Not only does he know every hair on our head, but he knows our secrets. And also, there's no demon in your closet that God can't get rid of. And I love that about God, because our God is a big God. He's a cosmic God. He's not just an earthly God. He's a cosmic God. And he knows, and nothing is too big for him. Nothing is also too bad for him. So own up to your demons. Number two is stop doing the same thing. This is one that I struggle with. You know, I give it up, but then I go right back to it. I give it up, but then I go right back to it. Stop doing the same thing. Remember, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. Don't do that. If you want out of the sin in your life, you have to make some changes. It's not always an easy thing to do. I'm not pretending that it is. But some of you have made a decision not to follow the world's way, and you've made a spiritual decision to say, I'm hungry for God. I'm going to continue to be hungry for God. So I want to put the world's way behind me, and I want to give to God's way. If that's true, you can't keep going back and doing the same stuff over and over. You got to break free. You got to break free from the chains, just like the demon-possessed guy did. If you're struggling with pornography, guess what? You need to get rid of the computer. You need to put on some stuff that will protect you, some software that will, accountability stuff. If that's your deal. If you're struggling with partying, then maybe you need to give up the parties for a while until you're strong enough to go to a party without getting into the party. Whatever it is that you're struggling with, you got to give something up. Something's got to change. So stop doing the same thing. Jesus can break you out of the chains, but you have to remove yourself from the graveyard. You see, the demon guy, he didn't go back to the cemetery. He went to the city to tell everybody about what had happened. He didn't go back. You can't keep doing the same thing. Number three, start a new thing. Start something new. If you give something up, replace it with something good. I always tell students, and I always tell them myself, Rick, if you're going to give up this one thing that is a negative in your life, you got to replace it with something godly. You got to replace the negative with God. Now, my friend Eric, he struggled with that. He was really stuck on his past, and he had some real issues, and he had some real addictions, and it took him a long time. I don't know where Eric is today, but I'm hoping that he's loving Jesus today. And I'm hoping that he was able to get rid of the good and get rid of the bad and put in some good. So choosing to live a life following Jesus leads to a life full of hope and joy and purpose. And we got to put our faith in God's path. We got to stop dealing with the symptoms of our sin and deal with the sin. You got to stop dealing with the symptoms of your sin and deal with the sin. And then part of starting a new thing is number 4. Believe that God has forgiven you. Believe that God has forgiven you. Just believe that you're forgiven. Accept God's forgiveness. Don't be like Eric and say, God could never forgive me, because God's looking up at you from heaven. He's saying, I want to forgive you. I'm willing to forgive you. I will forgive you. And I'll forgive you again, and I'll forgive you again, and I'll forgive you again. And I call that thing grace. And it's amazing, that thing called grace. And I'll give it to you. So just believe that you are forgiven. No matter how nasty, no matter how ugly the path is, your God and my God says, I got you. I forgive you. I forgive you. You see, what Jesus did on the cross was meant to take what is unforgivable and make it forgivable. What Christ did on the cross was meant to take all of your junk that you think is unforgivable and make it forgivable. That's God's amazing grace. Would you pray with me? Father, I thank you for the collisions in my life that I've had with you and I've had with people that you've put in my path. Lord, and I pray for a lot more collisions in my life. Lord, because I recognize that I am not there. I got a long way to go, and I need more and more collisions in my life. Father, I also pray that that I would allow my life to collide with people that need you, the Erics, that are walking on this earth, thinking that there is no God that loves them or thinking that a God could never forgive them for the stuff in their lives. Lord, help me to position myself in such a way that I would collide with people like that so that they might know that there's a God that loves them, that the God that created all of the universe loves them. God, I pray that for my friends too in this room. That God, that they would continue to pray for collisions with you, that they would open their eyes and find opportunities to allow their lives to collide with other people. So that just like the demon-possessed guy that turned into the choir boy went and told his community about you, that we would be that same guy and we would go and leave the cemetery behind and tell other people about what you're doing in our lives. Because God, you're a great God. You're doing some really cool stuff and we should let others know it. God, help us to be a collision. Help us to collide. In your name we pray. Amen.